So then, if you awaken from this illusion,
persistence of vision.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Persistence of Vision podcast, the outer space, earthbound, underwater, super podcast about books that we read so that you have to read them too. My name is LB Dio, and I'm your host, along with my guest host, Mr. Union Brooks.
Hi, folks.
Hey, that's Union Brooks, super intern to the stars, and he's filling in for Lance Fever Myers. Speaking of Lance Fever Myers, have you read Lance Fever Myers' Clash of the Christmas Clones?
It's a story about Santas being replicated.
What?
Yes, cloned Santas, yes, and in many forms, including the forms of sharks. So if you want to read that book, and obviously you do, you need to go to the POV website, which is pov-publishing.com, and order it along with Lance's other novel, Why So Much, and my own book, The Goddamn Fool. Forgive me for such an offensive title. I simply could not help myself. Now, do you have anything to say in your own defense, Union?
Nope. Except that both books are extraordinary, and you should get on POV-publishing and buy them now.
Yes, did you hear that? Extraordinary, folks, and I couldn't agree more. Now, we're very excited because we're finally going to be talking about one of the most popular and beloved series of the modern age, the Game of Thrones Song of Ice and Fire books by George R.R. Martin, of which Game of Thrones technically is the name of the first book. And to discuss these books, we couldn't have asked for a better guest than Austin's own Web Jerome. Web, welcome.
Hi, thank you for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Well, we're excited to have you. My goodness.
Yes, ma'am.
I hope you have your nerd caps on and ready to nerd out with me.
This nerd cap doesn't come off.
Yes. Yes.
It is attached. And what about your nerd cap? You're not only an aficionado of these books, but you're also an actress and a superstar here in town. Tell us about some of your work you've done here very briefly.
I just finished As You Like It this past December with Austin Shakespeare, and then before that I did Robert Mueller's Greatest Hits.
Robert Mueller's Greatest Hits.
I did that at Hyde Park, and then also I did Death Tax at Hyde Park, and that's the latest things I did.
Death Tax. What a great play also. Well, yes, if you haven't been to Hyde Park Theater or to Austin Shakespeare, then shame on you and shame on this great republic. Now then, tell us, what is it about the Song of Ice and Fire series that so intrigued you, Web Jerome?
I just have an interest in the macabre in general. I am into anything dark, vampires, you name it. So fantasy calls to me just in general. So just it being in the fantasy genre already pulled me towards it. But once I started reading it, I fell in love with George R.R. Martin's words, because it seemed like the things he was writing were things that I would have written in my diary. It's like someone stole my diary and was like, and we're reading the contents out loud. That's how I felt with so many of like the inner monologues of some of the characters. Mm-hmm. And when it's not things that were seemingly from my own mind, it was just the political intrigue and the plot. I've never read such an intricate, mind-boggling, attention-grabbing plot. So
if I were to abscond with your diary, I might very well read accounts of a family being slaughtered at a wedding and
incest,
giant dragons attacking cities. Zombies, of course. Well, naturally. So you love the macabre and you love fantasy, perhaps as a result of this, and then needless to say, there are thousands and thousands of fantasy books out there to choose from, but these were particularly literary and particularly intricately plotted.
Yes. I think as of today, this is the best, even better than Tolkien. This is the best fantasy, what do you call it? Saga. Saga. Just like it takes the best from Tolkien, but George R.R. Martin has a quote because everyone is always comparing him to Tolkien, and he loves Tolkien, and he'll say himself that he's one of his inspirations. But he said that one thing that inspired him to write Game of Thrones is it's kind of like an answer to Lord of the Rings, and like, okay, so Aragorn is king, cool, but what are his tax policies? And that's what that's why George R.R. Martin wrote Game of Thrones like this, where it's like, yes, it's the fantasy. We do have the king we want in power, or maybe not, but it goes deeper than that. Here are his tax policies. Here's what he feels about day-to-day life.
Yes.
So it's kind of like that bridge between it's fantasy, but then it's also real life, because yes, we have dragons and magic, but also people are going through miscarriages and bad marriages, or can't raise their kids properly, like real life things that would happen.
Taxes. Tax
so
codes.
real. There's nothing as realistic as taxes.
That's really selling the book there, Webb. Tax codes.
I think that's one of the it's so amazing how he handles mundane activities in life, and just in the realm of some of the most brilliant fantasy events.
Yes.
And
he'll spend a page just going into the types of food at the feast, like fowl, roasted, and apple. And it's like, okay, but is a family about to be slaughtered right now? Because what is going on? Right. So yeah, he definitely doesn't skimp on the mundane and day-to-day things. Bowel movements are in there.
Of course.
If you've ever wondered about that, or women menstruating and what's that?
Do dragons have bowel movements in the book?
Not yet. The books aren't finished yet, so maybe
that's true. We may be building up to the very, very best part. Okay, so you've talked a little bit about why you love the books, but why should I, or Union, or our listening audience, why would they love the books?
Why? I think there's something in it for everyone. I fell in love with the TV series first, and then I got into the books. So even from the TV series, I just felt like anyone from any walk of life would love it, from a librarian to a biker to a thug on the street. Like, there's something in it for all of them. There's a character that they can relate to, or something that happened that I think it could be the book to unify everyone on Earth, actually. The answer to world peace is in the series.
It's high time that someone wrote a book for thugs.
Yeah. I think like sell swords are just like, modern day thugs, right? Like whoever's paying them the most and killing his life. Like, I don't know.
Okay, so these are novels.
Yes.
What are they about?
So it depends on who you ask. Some people might say it's a statement on war. Mm-hmm. Some might say it's a love story. Mm. Some might say it's a story about destiny and fulfilling or not fulfilling it. I think it's about all those things. I think, yes, definitely it's a statement on war and the effects of it, and how you have these big politicians that want to go into it for whatever reason, noble or not, but they don't suffer. It's always the small folk that suffer. I think it makes a statement on love, on what it is to be in love and whether it matters that you're in love. And then about destiny, about choosing your own destiny or letting it be written for you and just, going along with the flow.
Yeah. And it's about though a fictitious world.
Yes.
Right. Where there are two continents, Essos and Westeros. Is that right?
Yes. There's also Sothrios, which kind of looks like Africa, which hasn't been traveled. And then the map isn't finished. Okay. Because with George R.R. Martin's works, even like his encyclopedia companion works are still written in the voice of the maesters, and the maesters are the scholars of this world. So, for example, there's the World of Ice and Fire, which is like the encyclopedia, which is like the Silmarillion, and so is Fire and Blood. So it's just kind of like an encyclopedia of what happened before. But there's one passage, since it is written by a maester, where this big event is happening, and literally 4 kings die at this event, and the maester has spilled ink on that page. So you are just reading like the Great Night, and then blank, blank, blank,
right,
fire, exactly. Blank, 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 millions killed, blank, blank, blank. Who started it? And then so even his answer to our questions are still more questions, because
that's the nature of ancient history in our world, at least, as well.
So you never know
fragments
what's right.
come down.
So in a lot of ways, it's a saga about history and kind of like family.
Yes.
With the people involved, and the characters and how all their stories are intertwined.
Yes, it's like a multi-generational book. Well, it's kind of about Tyrion has a quote about the sins of the father and how like children we're products of our parents, and like everything that we are doing is because something that our parents did, whether it be like a big thing or a small thing, and how you can try to escape that, be like, I don't want to be like my father, but you end up being like him. Or you can embrace that and be like, I want to be just like my father. And like wanting that so bad is what leads to your downfall.
Right.
So like either way, you're screwed.
Mm-hmm. Well, a lot of people get screwed in this book, don't they?
Yeah. I hear that's a running theme is everybody's screwed.
No one's safe.
No one's safe.
And that's another thing I like about this book is because it doesn't matter who you are. This book will surprise you just with like all the turns. You think it's going this way, or the hero has to win because in all the other books I read, they won, and the person who does the right thing or the person who does the wrong things, you think they should have this end. And sometimes they do.
Yes.
And sometimes they don't. And it's just, you never know. Like, it's great. It's great. If you like to be teased, I guess, this is the book for you because you will never feel satisfied. You will always be wanting more or like hoping for more or waiting for an answer to your question. It's read this book. Books.
The series has been controversial to some extent. I remember there was an episode where one of the characters, Jaime Lannister, who is a fairly sympathetic character, I would say, even though he does some terrible things. He's likable, shall we say. Does that sound reasonable?
Extremely likable.
He's very handsome in the show.
He's handsome on the show. Okay.
And in the books, too, but that's what I'll say about Jaime.
But in any case, he is reunited with his sweetheart, whom we won't name, but he rapes her, and there was a great uproar among fans, especially female fans, I think, that this character whom they sort of like, despite his flaws, was committing this egregious act, and there didn't seem to be any negative consequences. And I remember George R.R. Martin did issue a bit of an apology. What do you think about the extent of the brutality in these books?
I just think it's life. Everything that happened in these books, I feel like have happened in real life, from like the most heinous rapes and acts against man, which happened in this book. You know, I think at some point it happened to someone somewhere. So I think like that's human life. Like being human is disgusting and it's horrible and it's macabre. And like for him to go there and to not be afraid to show like how evil a person can, like the darkest part of you is brave. And I think that's what makes the book so compelling, because there is fantasy, there's dragons and everything, but the worst things that happen is what people do to each other in the books.
Yes.
The worst acts, so.
And yet the people are not so easily divided into villains and heroes, right?
They can't be. It's impossible because humans are not heroes or villains. We're always a little bit of both. Right. Or like more of one or more of the other.
Well, I was going to ask, talking about this with friends, a lot of people have asked me if they think certain characters who've done horrible things in earlier books and have kind of turned it around is like, are these good characters? Are these good people now, even considering the evils of their past? It's... what do you think that says about character development? Can people change? Do people change? Or is it...
Yes and yes. Yes, people can change, and yes, they do change, but sometimes they change back, which is another thing in the story. Like, going to the show, a lot of people were upset that Jaime, the character you just mentioned, went through this big character arc where he went from a bad person to a good person, and then in the end, he goes back to a bad person, and people are like, well, that's a waste of his character arc, but it's like, no, that's human nature. Mm-hmm. Sometimes you spend your whole life doing the right thing, and then you do something bad, and that leads down another path, and you go back to being good, or it could go any way. That's the thing about human nature. We're constantly evolving. Today, I could do the right thing. Tomorrow, I might take the red light. The next day, I might give to the homeless, and the next day, I could do something horrible. Like, you just never know, and I think it's what these books have taught me. It's like it's futile in trying to box people into good or bad. It's just about knowing that it's fluid, like how everyone says certain things are fluid now, but I think character is fluid, and whether someone is good or bad. So I think that's what George R.R. Martin is showing us is that like he's showing us a good character, then flipping it, showing us a bad character and flipping it, showing like don't get married to the idea that this person is good or bad. That's not what's important here. What's important is something else that I haven't figured out yet. But yes.
But very broadly speaking, the book is about this fictitious world again.
Yes.
That has these, at least in Westeros, the main setting for the book, for the books, it's a medieval feudal type of world where the political power is divided between the monarchy and the lords. And the lords have what they call houses.
Yes.
Which are their estates, their armies, their
identities,
political nation states. Yes. And so there's a Westeros king, at least at the beginning.
Yes.
And then you have these feudal nobility.
Exactly.
And most of the characters, well, actually, it's not true. I was going to say most of the characters fall into the nobility or the monarchy, but there are a great many characters who are
peasants
or
even
soldiers.
The peasants, they've somehow gotten in with the nobility. So even the peasants aren't really peasants, except for the sex workers, which they're just peasants. But
and there's also clergy, of course.
Yes.
Which is interesting because it's not a Christian world, but there are some religious, one particular religious order that's very Christian-like in many ways.
The Faith of the Seven.
Yes. Well, I was thinking of the Faith of the Seven, but that very powerful order that threatens
that follow the Red God.
Mm-hmm.
There's several religions, aren't there, that kind of clash? Like there's old gods.
There's the old gods. There's the old gods. There's the Faith of the Seven, which is like the main religion, which George R.R. Martin grew up extremely Catholic. So that's what that's based on. Then there is the Drowned God, which is what the pirates, the Iron Islands, that's what they believe in, which is also kind of based on Christianity because it has their main thing is that they drown people, and if you come back to life through CPR, then like you're okay. But it's like that's another thing that George R.R. Martin's an atheist, and everything, all his statements about religion are just basically showing how far you'll go for religion, and then he kind of pulls back the curtain and shows that there is no religion. Like I brought you back because of CPR.
Right.
But in those days, they didn't realize that pumping the chest is what brought the person back. They're thinking it's their God.
That's a marvelous little development in there. This religion about drowning people being resuscitated. Yes.
Yeah. So he does that a lot, where he'll show something magical and then provide you with a scientific answer. Yeah. So very cheeky.
Is there something? I guess I want to ask about the three-eyed raven. And is this magic sort of religious, or is it more of?
So the three-eyed raven is the old gods.
Okay.
From what we understand so far, so the old gods is kind of just like kind of like an internet connection of trees. There's like these big trees called weirwoods, which are white, and then they have red leaves, and they have faces on them. The leaves are actually shaped like your hands, like 5 fingers. Oh. So it's supposed to look like a person's head, because the trunk is the head coming out of the ground, and like the leaves are their hands, and it's like monstrously pulling forward type of thing. But all the trees, they're giant trees that live forever, and underneath the ground, across the entire continent, they're actually interlocked.
Oh, wow.
All the roots are interlocked. And because of that, there's like also like these massive underground tunnels that nobody knows about, actually. So that's one of the things. Is it magic that the three-eyed raven, or is it just the fact that all these trees are connected? So if you're connected to one tree in the north, you can access the memories of a tree in the south.
Whoa.
And that's what Bran is doing, is anything that takes place in front of a weirdwood tree, he's privy to that knowledge, because the trees have eyes. They can see that. They can see all the marriages. They can see all the murders, anything that happened in front of these trees.
Bran is one of the scions of the House Stark, which is, we talked about the lack of heroes and villains, but the Stark family is
they're painted as
about
the
as
heroes.
close as you get to heroic in this book.
Yes, yes. And I would say that they're the main family as well. Or like, if you want to, there's George R.R. Martin says there's no main character, but a lot of people would say the Starks are, or like Bran is. But yeah, so that's what Bran does. Is people say it's magic because he can see in the past and the future, but is it just a type of science that we're not understanding, like a tree prototype of the internet.
Right.
I actually like to think about what is how long has the world been around? No, like 6,000 or 7,000 years? Is that right?
Oh, yeah. Well, that's the thing we don't know because everything is written by the maesters. And
Yes.
so far they have it at 8,000 years.
8,000. Okay, so that's interesting because that's about how long human civilization in our world has been around since the.
Exactly.
I mean, you have agriculture appearing about 10,000 years ago, but then the city-states and so forth that began to emerge in the countries and things like that really are about 8,000 years old. And it's interesting to think about in Martin's world, this 8,000 years has resulted in a world that's most comparable in our world to about 500-600 years ago, right? Where you have the Middle Ages. It's a very medieval style, like most fantasy. It has a medieval style.
So they're like dragging their feet basically in Westeros with
right, but it's interesting that if they're dragging their feet because there's a lot more. There's magic in this world. There's things like the three-eyed raven and the dragons that don't exist in our world, and therefore that might explain why there hasn't been as much of a push for an industrial revolution or for a scientific revolution because it's possible to accomplish a lot of things that we wouldn't have been able to accomplish in medieval times or even in the Renaissance. In their world, where you have magic and you can and they have this system of ravens, just to give a very simple example, where you can give news. Yeah, but I don't think it was ever quite as effective. I mean, like there really is almost like email or something. You can reliably get a message to the other side of the continent in a matter of days, at any time you want, and it's not even something you worry about. Yes. Which we had carrier pigeons, but it's not like they were nearly that effective.
Yes.
So they're able to do things that our society at that civilizational level we're not able to do.
We had to answer it with science and technology.
Yes.
And they don't have to. I get what you're saying. I never thought about that. But I have thought about, there's a fan theory that says that the reason that there's such a, being around for 8,000 years and not progressing like we have is because there's a fan theory that the story we're reading now is post-apocalyptic. Mm-hmm. So George R.R. Martin says that we call it Planetos because he hasn't given a name to it yet. But Planetos, he says that it's like Earth, but like in another dimension, like another, the Thousand Worlds theory. Mm-hmm. Like if something in our Earth's history would have went another way, we would have been Western.
Right. But if a butterfly had flapped its wing the other way, it would have gone.
So it's Earth, but because something in the distant past happened differently, they ended up how they ended up. But so they had their big apocalypse, and then everyone had to start over. So that's why it seems like... So they're thinking that like all of the magic is leftover technology. Like the tree roots I was talking about could have been some sort of permanent version of the internet that we got to, or even the dragons. The legends say that this group found them and tamed them in volcano crevices. So think about like maybe there's like lizards that mutated because of a nuclear war. That
like
they're it's always kind of like that's how George R.R. Martin writes. He writes so open that like you can always kind of speculate, make your own fan theories. I just went off on a tangent there. Sorry.
No, that's a great tangent.
Good one.
But that would kind of explain why. But the thing that's similar to them is that when you're reading the histories, everything is wrong. Things that don't make sense, which is purposely like that because they're written by man. But it's funny that when I think back to 8,000 years ago, there's no way we as Earthlings could say what happened because we don't have the written words, and the words that we do have, we can't really decipher them. So like really
conflicting accounts.
Exactly. So it's the same thing with Westeros. The reason their history is so muddled is because the same thing, like you can't really go back that far and give like a distinct answer to what happened because
like you might know what countries there were and that they fought some wars, but you don't know very detailed information about their lives.
Yeah. So I like that link.
So a lot of the people who are listening have not read these books but have seen the TV shows. Have you can you give us some indication of what might be the differences between the TV show and the books?
Well, I will say, like, especially Game of Thrones, the season 1 of Game of Thrones, and book 1 is like the most I've ever seen a show or movie follow a book series. Like literally the words that you're reading is the lines that the actors said.
I even noticed reading that, and I just thought it was so creepy. Like
it's kind of creepy,
it's
but
almost like I've read this before.
Yes. But then as starting with like the third book, then the plot kind of changes because they left out about like, I'll say 2/3 of the characters. Yeah. There are so many characters in the books. Minor characters, but then big characters that have huge plot elements. Like one of them is Lady Stoneheart. She is Catelyn Stark. So at the end of the Red Wedding, I'll mention 2 things left out of the book that's actually wrapped into one. 2 for 1. Here we go. So the first thing, circling back, the first thing is like all the Stark children can warg, not just Bran. Warging is being able to put your mind in the mind of an animal and controlling that animal. Mm-hmm. So in the show, only Bran can do it, but in the books, all the Stark children can do it except Sansa, who lost her wolf early on.
Now, do they also have the power to like see the past, or
no,
just the animal?
That's just the 3-eyed raven that could do that. That can see the past and the future because of their connection to the weirwoods.
Right.
But warging is just jumping into the skin of an animal.
Right.
If you're born with the gift, you can do it. It's rare that, all 5 children are born with it, but I think that's the point that George R.R. Martin is making is like, pay attention to these kids. So all the Stark children can warg, and there's actually the scene where Arya is in the mind of her wolf, Nymeria, and she sees something floating in the water, and she pulls it out of the stream, and it's her mother, her dead mother.
Wow.
Which is Catelyn Stark. This is right after the Red Wedding. So she pulls her from the stream onto the banks. She, as her wolf, hears men coming, so she scampers away. The men coming happen to be the Brotherhood Without Banners, and they have, Thoros of Myr with him and Beric Dondarrion. And Beric Dondarrion sees her, recognizes it's Catelyn Stark, and he gives her the kiss of death, which he breathes fire into her mouth, and she comes back alive, and he dies. So she cannot talk because they slit her throat, but she can kind of gargle and like whisper, and like people know what she's saying. So she becomes this huge revenge character who's not even human anymore, just like this being that's full of revenge. And all she does is kill Freys and Lannisters. So it's like, that's a big character to leave out of the show. And I understand why they did that. I read about it and that was enough. I didn't want to see Lady Stoneheart, but I think the fact that all the kids could warg was something that they should have left in the show. I get that they didn't want to confuse everyone with them constantly jumping into the skins of animals, and they wanted to make Bran special. But just that moment of Arya being the one to pull her mother out of the stream is powerful when you're reading it. Like there's like tears on the page, and I was like, no, she's 9 years old. She shouldn't be seeing this. But that's the thing, like 9-year-olds sometimes have to see their dead parents. So the advantage of the books, perhaps predictably, is the level of complexity and in the plotting and the number of characters that would not be practical to include in a TV show. Exactly.
And it seems like the quality of writing is just all around so good.
Superb, magnificent.
Obviously, George R.R. doesn't have a budget on what he can write.
Exactly, yes.
I'm excited to get into this and read the last one because the disappointing TV show.
Hopefully by the time you finish the whole series, the 6th book will be out, which is the one we've been waiting for.
Yeah, how long has it been that the fans have been waiting for the 6th book?
For a long time, because 3 years ago, George R.R. Martin released sample chapters, which sample chapters is supposed to mean that like books written. So that was 3 years ago that he released the sample chapters.
How many? Or just 1 or 2?
I think he released 4.
Okay.
4.
But it's been like 15 years. It's not like been 2 years.
Yes. Wow. Those are since the sample
long
chapters.
Before the TV show came out.
The last one in the series was like 2011.
2011, yeah.
Oh, is that really that recent?
That's the last book that came out, the 5th book, The Dance of the Dragons. But he started in 96, so it's like the first book came out in 1996.
Right.
So it's like it's a long time to wait. And I know fans of the book who are refusing to watch the show until the books are finished. So they've literally been waiting 20 years since 1996 to figure out who Jon Snow's parents are because they still don't know. Like, this is like the level of dedication we're working with in the series. But
well, it's an amazing thing that you find when you create a world this complex and this real in its own way. You earn the adulation and the commitment of
obsession. I would
people.
say
Obsession. Would you say that you were obsessed by these books?
I'm obsessed. I close my eyes and I see this world. I was just saying before we started this podcast that I can name the Targaryen kings from the first to the present. I can't do that for our current U.S. presidents.
That's amazing.
Yeah, well.
Could you tell us a little bit about this book he released about the Targaryen history?
Yes.
As it's connected with A Song of Ice and Fire, isn't?
Yes. So let me just preface this by saying, so there's 5 main books. So if you're listening and like you haven't heard anything about the Song of Ice and Fire, you start with the 5 main books, which is the Game of Thrones, Clash of Kings, Storm of Swords, A Feast for Crows, and A Dance with Dragons. That just tells the main big Hollywood story about this family. And then there are the Tales of Dunk and Egg, which are novellas. He plans on writing 12. So far, he's written 3. And to the anger of all of his fans, he's writing them in between writing the main book series. So those kind of tell about 100 years before Game of Thrones. So they're just kind of like Mark Twain style, just like 2 unlikely characters, good cop, bad cop, that are just out fighting crime type of thing. So very feel good, not too much incest, not too much murder, just kind of like feel good novellas. And then he has the compendiums, which the first one is The World of Ice and Fire, which I read and loved. It's basically like an encyclopedia that just says everything you're missing. It'll list the Targaryen kings. It'll tell you about their policies. It'll tell you the houses, who was the first lord, and what did their kids do. And
did he write these?
So he's written all the narratives, like the Tales of Dunk and Egg, and the main 5. But for the encyclopedias, he gets the help of Elio and Linda, who are just 2 people. Well, they're like super fans in that when he wrote his second book, they actually emailed him and wrote to him before he is who he is now. And they're like, you said this character has green eyes, and they actually have blue eyes. and they caught his mistakes.
Right.
So from early on, he was like, okay, you guys are going to be on my team.
Nerds. Yeah.
And so they pretty much wrote the encyclopedia and also Fire and Blood, because George doesn't have the time or interest to kind of go in and nitpick the things like eye color and hair color, which he often messes up. So he'll write it and then they'll kind of proof it, and because they know the history is more than him, and he'll say that. So I have Fire and Blood here. It's the first volume. The second one is going to come out someday. And this is basically like a history, but it is only the history of the Targaryen rulers. So it spans 300 years, which is when the first Targaryen ruler united Westeros. So they instead of being kingdoms, they became one nation. Yeah. So that's kind of where 300 years ago is where you can say for sure that this happened. This is when everyone was writing. This is when you have eyes everywhere. So 300 years ago, everything that happened in his book happened. But then as opposed to like The World of Ice and Fire, which they're talking about things that are 8,000 years ago, which is kind of like hearsay. And it's like there's no way to know because that was before written history. So Fire and Blood is a good book, but it won't mean anything to you until you've read the entire series and you're hungering for more. Because this is just like...
So this is great for the addicts who have devoured
finish,
every single word of
need
these
that
books.
Next fix.
Yes.
Yeah, need the fix. Okay, speaking of addicts and things that have nothing to do with addiction... I'm starting to see the sky getting a little darker. Is there, before the lightning round is upon us, do you have anything else you'd like to tell us about these books or anything else?
I actually prepared a little excerpt to read.
Oh, of course.
Yes.
Thank you for being on top of that, because I obviously was not.
So, so out of like the 5 books plus the 3 novellas and the 2 encyclopedias, I'm trying to think of like what work could express Song of Ice and Fire, or what it's about. So I chose this piece. It's actually in the show. It's probably word for word in the show because it's just brilliant writing. But it kind of just gives you an idea of like the themes that we're working with in the show. So I will read it now.
Excellent. Ladies and gentlemen, an excerpt from the Song of Ice and Fire by George R.R. Martin, as read by Web Jerome. And maybe this is a great opportunity to make an announcement also.
Okay.
Web Jerome, as you can tell, is an excellent scholar and has a wonderful voice. And she has agreed to read the audiobook for my own novel, The Goddamn Fool. Oh, I see the look of extreme surprise on Union's face. I don't think anyone knows. I don't think even Webb knew this.
What the?
So,
Fired.
yes, so this is extremely exciting, and I'm sure you agree, ladies and gentlemen. So, yes, let's go ahead, and why don't you read that excerpt for us?
Okay, so this is from A Clash of Kings, which is the second book, and there are no chapters. It's just it just says the character heading. So this would be Tyrion 2. In a room sit 3 great men, a king, a priest, and a rich man with his gold. Between them stands a sellsword, a little man of common birth and no great mind. Each of the great ones bids him slay the other 2. Do it, says the king, for I am your lawful ruler. Do it, says the priest, for I command you in the names of the gods. Do it, says the rich man, and all this gold shall be yours. So tell me, who lives and who dies? The king, the priest, the rich man. Who lives and who dies? Who will the swordsman obey? It's a riddle without an answer, or rather too many answers. All depends on the man with the sword. And yet, he is no one, Varys said. He has neither crown nor gold nor favor of the gods, only a piece of pointed steel. That piece of steel is the power of life and death. Just so. Yet, if it is the swordsmen who rule us in truth, why do we pretend our kings hold the power? Why should a strong man with a sword ever obey a child king like Joffrey or a wine-sodden oaf like his father? Because these child kings and drunken oafs can call other strong men with other swords. Then these other swordsmen have the true power. Or do they? Whence came their swords? Why do they obey? Varys smiled. Some say knowledge is power. Some tell us that all power comes from the gods. Others say it derives from law. Yet that day on the steps of Baelor's Sept, our godly High Septon and the lawful Queen Regent and your ever so knowledgeable servant were as powerless as any cobbler or cooper in the crowd. Who truly killed Eddard Stark, do you think? Joffrey, who gave the command? Sir Ilyn Payne, who swung the sword? Or another? Tyrion cocked his head sideways. Did you mean to answer your damn riddle, or only to make my headache worse? Varys smiled. Here then, power resides where men believes it resides, no more and no less. So power is a mummer's trick, a shadow on the wall, Varys murmured. Yet shadows can kill, and oft-times a very small man can cast a very large shadow.
Ooh.
Yes.
Outstanding. Clap, 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 clap.
No, I just love that excerpt because it just kind of, this is a question that I didn't know the answer to. And I'm actually curious to hear you two gentlemen's answers as to where power resides. Because this is what the book essentially is about.
Power.
And choice too, because it's like, yes, imagine that you are a sellsword with that sword, and these 3 people are telling you to use it. Like, who would you choose? The priest who's telling you that my God, our God, is telling you to do this. The king or president or the law is telling you to do it. Or is it the rich man, something that you will gain from it? Like, it could be money, but it could be a position. And I think that's the question that we are faced every day.
Yes. Well, what is your answer, Union?
I think the power resides in choice, because the guy who chooses is the guy in charge.
Right?
The sellsword has the power because he
Exactly.
can choose. That's your answer.
He can also just walk away from those guys. Hopefully.
No, he can't.
Depending on the situation.
He can't walk away. This is feudal society.
Oh, yeah, that's right.
Well, maybe he can. Maybe
Run
that's
away.
But there's a consequence in walking away, right?
there's a consequence to all the choices, though.
Exactly.
Like he gives up the opportunities of wealth if he doesn't follow the rich man.
The rich man.
Gives up his peace of mind, at least, if he doesn't follow the priest.
The priest.
And he puts himself on the foul side of the law if he doesn't obey
the king.
So he doesn't really have a good choice, but walking away is just another bad choice.
Right. Because even if you go with the king, now you have the priest on your bad side.
Mm-hmm.
If anything, it just shows that there's repercussions no matter what you choose. It's interesting, yeah. There's
that sort of Mohandas Gandhi interpretation would say that the choice or the power comes from the willingness to be punished. That if you say, I don't care what the consequences are for me, I'm going to do what I want to do, or in Gandhi's case, that would be to do the right thing, quote unquote, he would say, yes, if we're willing to be punished for our choices, then we truly are free. So that's one way of looking at it. I guess that goes back to Thoreau.
Who will punish me less?
Or or who has the power? Like a Thoreau or a Gandhi or a Martin Luther King would say, no, it's not a question of who will punish me less. It's a question of my willingness to be hurt or even destroyed in order to have the ability to make a choice. And that the person who is going to kill me after I make that choice doesn't really have any power at all unless I give it to him.
Okay. I can see that.
In most real situations, I probably go with the rich guy.
The rich guy?
Go with the money.
Not me. I would go with the law.
I think as much as I hate to say, I think I'd go with the law.
Yeah, like if a rich guy said, hey, go kill someone for me, you might think about it for a minute, but you'd probably think, well, I'm likely going to go to jail if I do this.
Unless those riches take you off to an island.
Yeah. I mean, you'd listen to the rich guy's proposal.
At least hear him out.
But in feudal society, I don't know.
The same thing. Feudal society, a guy could spirit you away, but... Well, in Macbeth, for example, we have not quite feudal society, but we have the Macbeth hires killers to do his bidding, so that happens, and they're clearly on the wrong side of the law. But, yes, and now I'm almost positive that the sky is pitch black, and there's lightning.
Oh, boy.
And thunder going on.
Web, are you ready for the lightning round?
As ready as I'll ever be.
All right. Tell us, when was the first time you fell in love with a book?
Probably the first book that I went to sleep with and held to my chest would be Matilda.
Matilda.
I love Roald Dahl.
Classic.
Yeah, I read him a lot as a child, so probably that one. I wanted to be Matilda so bad.
Has a book ever changed your mind?
Probably every book. Books change my mind like TV changes the regular person's mind. Probably the first one that changed my mind would be Number the Stars. That's a Number the Stars. It's a middle school, middle school Holocaust book, basically.
Right.
Yeah. But it just kind of.
I remember reading that in middle school.
Yes, it just.
What
really,
did it change your mind about?
Consequences of war, or what war is. At that time, my conception of war was brave men on this side with swords, brave men on that side with swords, and we fight a fair battle. But then reading that book, there were no soldiers. Well, there were soldiers in the concentration camps, obviously, but I mean, there were no soldiers being hurt in that book. It was just regular people. So yeah, that kind of changed my
Fantastic book. Has a book ever changed your life?
Probably this saga right here, Song of Ice and Fire, just because it just changed how I think about things and how I think about people, the grayness of people. I was very naive before reading this series, and even as an adult, I just still thought that people were good, and they're not. They're not. They're not. They're vile.
Present company excluded. Thank you.
Oh man, has a book ever made you cry?
Yes, many times. I think the first book that made me cry that I can think of was Harry Potter. I think the fourth book where what's his name gets killed. Cedric.
Yes.
I was like, excuse me? I was 12. I'm like, why is a person dying in my 12-year-old book? So that was a big deal.
And can you name a book you've read more than once?
other than this saga, which I'm on my 4th reread of the whole thing. Other than that, book that Hitchhiker's Guide.
Okay.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Yes, we've covered that on the show.
Good one.
I'm sure you know that.
Yeah.
Excellent.
Do you have any poetry committed to memory?
Why, of course I do. I'm a scholar. Beans.
Oh, no.
They're good for your heart. The more you eat, the more you fart.
Well done indeed. One doesn't know what to say.
Love it.
Well, this has been a fantastic interview, and we've really covered the gamut, haven't we? Especially at the very end there. Any final thoughts from any of us?
Definitely read this saga. Whether you're a librarian, a thug, or a biker, there's something in it for you. I will warn you, though, that the only caveat is that you must have some free time on your hands. Otherwise, I recommend the audiobooks. Actually, one of the actors on the show did the audiobooks. Roy
Which
Detrice.
actor?
He's
Who do you play?
He just played a pyromancer. Not a big part, just a pyromancer. But
Cool.
Well, isn't there one more caveat about these books? I mean, don't you think that there are some people who might find them too disturbing to enjoy?
I'm trying to think of the triggers.
I'll give you a few.
Yeah.
All the triggers.
Rape, incest, violent murder, extreme torture, people being flayed alive, people being castrated, which happens quite frequently. Some people might find those to be emotionally difficult.
Just a little.
Yes, but I watched The Human Centipede, so I think I was pretty numb too.
I got to the diagrams and I was like, no, thank you.
So yeah.
All right. So if you can handle The Human Centipede, folks, you can handle the Song of Ice and Fire.
Yes. I'm sure George R.R. Martin would love to hear that.
Yes, he would be very grateful to hear it. All right. Well, we want to thank our very wonderful guest, Web Jerome. Do you have any upcoming performances to tell us about?
No, not yet. Just thank you for having me. I'm so happy to talk about my favorite books ever and get to reading, folks. I hope I convinced you. If not, find me on social media and I will berate you until you read them.
Yes, she will do it. And you, Union, any thoughts?
Don't forget to check out our website, pov-publishing.com. You can buy LB's book, The Goddamn Fool, or you can buy Lance Myers, Why So Much? We missed you, Lance.
Or Lance Myers' Clash of the Christmas Clones. And we did miss you, Lance. Lance will be back soon. I can assure you that he is fine. He is doing okay. There's nothing going on with Lance that you need to worry about. We love you, ladies and gentlemen, and we love the books. So keep it real.